Hello and welcome to Halloween, a Beniverse marathon, where we talk about every movie in the Halloween franchise. That is 13 movies in total. We're going on feature 7 today, where we talk about Halloween H20, Halloween 20 years later. This is the essentially reboot of the Halloween franchise. This film, for those who do not know, comes out in 1998 and it reboots the Halloween franchise. Only 1 and 2 are canon at this point. Only the events of Halloween 1 and Halloween 2 take place. It all ends with Laurie Strode in the hospital, Michael Myers burning up. 20 years later, it picks up from that storyline. Disregard 3, disregard 4, disregard 5, disregard 6. They have nothing to do with it. We are taking over the franchise. It's the first real reboot we got in the franchise. Joining me today to talk about Halloween H20 is my co-host, roommate Tris.
Hello.
Hello. And, you know, we've been talking about Halloween now for quite a long time. And I think there's been something really interesting that we've been hitting on. And it's the idea that the first Halloween sets up basically what is going to be the slasher genre. It really redefines what horror is in 1978 with Carpenter. After that, the franchise is kind of desperately trying to chase the new trends of horror, whether that's Halloween 2, which is trying to be Friday the 13th, whether it's Halloween 4, which is trying to then chase the original Halloween, whether it's 5 or 6 trying to take ideas, mythology, whether from Friday the not Friday the third, well, yes, Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street. Halloween is always in this constant chase of being relevant, and I think that's going to be a key word today in our discussion about H20 because Halloween H2O, it's impossible. And can we just address it right now? You and I teased it before we actually went on air. This is the worst title in the
Yeah,
franchise.
it
This
is.
title is garbage. It does not flow easy. I'm going to be calling it H2O basically all day today. So just be forewarned. The real title is Halloween H20, 20 years later. But getting back to what I was trying to say is we can't talk about this film. We can't talk about H2O without talking about the success of another little slasher film called Scream. And I think that's where we have to begin this discussion today. Uh, for those who do not know, and basically the thesis of this episode is going to be, at least my thesis is going to be, the screamification of Halloween. And it's basically the idea of Scream comes out in 1996. How does every horror film then post try to take the inklings and success and basically make their own version of Scream? And no film is a more blatant example of this than this film that literally has a story by the guy who wrote Scream, Kevin Williamson.
hmm
And we're just going to start that with that today. I think it's a really good starting place. But Tris, what's your relationship with the movie Scream?
It's one of my favorites, so you can probably guess that I love H2O
Yeah,
because Scream is one of my favorite horror movies ever.
yeah, and Scream takes obviously it's playing off the Michael Myers mythology, of course.
hmm
This is a film that, Scream promises that basically the difference between this and everything that comes in the 80s is these characters have seen horror movies. It's very pop referential. It's very much like, references after references. It's literally making reference to the first Halloween film in there, along with all of its sequels. This film lives and dies and breathes Halloween. It along with every other slasher film. It has this very particular style to it. Uh, it has a very particular cast that is very hot in 1996. Certain actors who have a very mainstream appeal with that generation. Halloween H2O does the exact same thing. And with that said, Tris, where are your feelings towards this movie? on H2O? Do you find it a ripoff of Scream, or do you find it being able to exist in a comfortable enough zone of its own while maybe paying homage, I guess you will say, to Scream?
I definitely don't think it's a ripoff. I think it's more of a product of its time, if you know what I mean.
Mm. And
I
can
mean,
you?
it
Mm.
definitely like honors Scream, and I think it's because Scream honors the original Halloween.
Yeah, it's this idea, right, where it's like Halloween is what inspires Scream. Scream is paying homage to Halloween. Halloween's H2O is paying homage to Scream, which is then paying homage to Halloween, which means H2O is both being paying reference to the predecessor of Scream and its literal predecessor in the first Halloween movie.
Yeah.
It's a pretty interesting experiment to see it. And again, it's this idea that I say it's so reactionary. Uh, Let me just list a few of the other films that come out in the 1990s for slasher films. Slasher's in a really weird spot right now. Everything's kind of trash. I mean, if you look at the list, you have the few exceptions. You have films like Candyman, but then you get Chucky 2 and 3. You get Nightmare on Elm Street. This is New Nightmare, which is actually a very good film. You
Hmm.
get Leprechaun. You get Halloween 6. You get Friday the 13th, Jason Goes to Hell. You get Freddy's Dead. It's a
That
lot
is
of
the worst That is the worst horror movie ever.
Freddy's Dead.
Freddy's Dead.
Yeah,
I
I mean, you're
don't recommend.
basically getting rehashes of basically everyone who was relevant in the 80s.
Uh huh.
And it's just like, okay, well, we're going to just keep giving them sequel to sequel to sequel and just devalue the legacy. Everyone knows what these films are. Everyone knows what the scares are. They've really just hit their corners now. It is really like, this is this type of film. This is what you're going to get from Jason. This is what you're going to get from Michael. This is what you're going to get from Freddy, with the exception again of New Nightmare. And then Scream comes around. Scream reinvents it. As again, it's this idea, right, of everyone's seen a horror film, thus nothing is particularly off the table. These characters all know every cliche. Everything kind of feels fresh because of that. You see Scream and you're when all the characters know what is about to happen, you don't know what's about to happen. And that really makes it interesting. And then, like I said, Halloween H2O. Basically, what happens is, and I don't know how much you know of the history of Halloween H2O, Tris, but Halloween H2O, it's originally pitched as a sequel. Kevin Williamson comes in and he's like, okay, I want to make Halloween 7 the Revenge of Laurie Strode. That's his original pitch. We're going to find out that Laurie Strode faked her death, and that explains why she died and isn't around for 4, 5, 6. We're going to find everything else, though, is relatively the same. It is supposed to be the idea of Laurie Strode is in hiding. She's in this away school, and then Michael Myers finds of her existence and goes after her. The studio changes that. Uh, for better or for worse, I think that is where people can decide. I think it's probably for the better to declutter the mythology. I don't know how you feel about this because I know you have fondness for 4, 5, and 6 to varying degrees.
Honestly, I can go from 6 to H20, and I'm so done with the Thorn trilogy that I'm ready for something fresh by the time I get to H20.
Yeah,
Even though I do adore those 80s schlocky Halloween films.
yeah, you're hitting on something here where there it's Homecoming, right? Yeah, another title to this film could be Halloween Homecoming,
Uh
and
huh.
it's because Laurie Strode comes home. Loomis has been leading the franchise since basically with 1981. He's really the main guy in Halloween 2, but specifically when he takes over in Return of Michael Myers, He's leading this franchise. This franchise is, though, completely built around the character of Laurie Strode. That first film works because we fear for Jamie Lee Curtis. We sympathize with this character, and we want to see how she will survive against Michael Myers. The rest of the films, the characters become killable. That's kind of the point. Michael Myers is the character you're paying to see. H20 brings it back and says Laurie Strode is the reason you're seeing this film. Jamie Lee Curtis comes back. And I think my favorite aspect of this film that we can get into, I think Jamie Lee Curtis is incredible in this film.
Yeah.
I like absolutely incredible. I think this might be her best performance as Laurie Strode. She comes back, and this is the first time we get to see this character really make something of this character of her own. Obviously, Halloween, she's the actress cast as Laurie. And then in Halloween 2, she comes back, but it's all kind of begrudgingly. She does it because she's kind of like, she has to. This is the film where she is the actress. Jamie Lee Curtis at this point is probably one of the 10 most famous actresses in Hollywood. She makes the decision. I want to come back to this franchise. I want to make this film, and I want to tell this story for Laurie Strode. So this film of all of them really feels like Jamie Lee Curtis being like, this is the film that I want to have ownership over. And it's really special in that way.
Yeah, I agree. I like her performance in this movie a lot. I think I prefer her performance overall in the newer trilogy, but that's just because I think that Halloween 2018 is a better movie than H20.
Yeah.
Probably.
And we're going to get into some aspects of this movie. Of all the Halloween films, I think there are certain scenes in this movie that have aged really well.
Yeah.
And then there's the exception of also of all of the Halloween movies, there is about 10 scenes in here that are horribly dated. And I don't mean like in some of the other ways where the action looks cheesy, where the dialogue is very 80s heavy, where just how they speak, the music they're listening to. This film is straight up like, okay, no, this is a relic of 1998. Characters say things that are like you have to remember it's 1998.
Yeah.
And that makes it at times really uncomfortable. And just straight up like I said, it dates the film. There's specifically with the teenage characters, Michelle Williams, who's an incredible actress, has a really profane, no, not profane. What's it called? What's it called when you're just cursing? Profanic? No.
That
What word?
profanity?
Profanity, but she has been okay.
Obscene?
Obscene. Obscene's the word that is probably the best. She has like a minute dialogue of her basically just roofing other people and date raping them. Like,
yeah.
That's where this film's aged. Where there is just stuff like, okay, that
That's a
wouldn't
joke.
be. That's a joke. Exactly. It's a joke.
Quote unquote joke.
Exactly.
For our podcast listeners.
Yeah. There's just stuff in this movie where it's like, okay, it hasn't aged particularly well. And that's the product of basically everything Kevin Williamson has made in his career outside of maybe Scream. I mean, if you look at Dawson's Creek, that hasn't aged particularly well in aspects. If you look at, I Know What He Did Last Summer, that hasn't aged particularly well in certain scenes. And if you look at this movie, this hasn't aged particularly well in other scenes. So that's another thing. This film is a product of its era, probably more than any other Halloween film.
Yeah.
There are certain aspects of this movie that I find really interesting. One of them being Carpenter's supposed to return. This is supposed to be Carpenter coming back to direct this movie. They offer him $10 million. Or no, sorry, let me say that around. Carpenter demands that he's paid $10 million. The Weinstein brothers just straight out refuse. They say there is no way we are giving John Carpenter 10 million movies when his last 5 films have been flops. When his last film is the Memoirs of the Invisible Man in 1992 with Chevy Chase, it is just the decision that, like, okay, This guy doesn't understand horror anymore. We don't even know if he's competent at filmmaking anymore. And look at the difference between Wes Craven and John Carpenter. Wes Craven continued proving post his
Mm-hmm.
Nightmare on Elm Street that he had hit after hit. And then when he comes back for New Nightmare, that is a critical success.
Mm-hmm.
Carpenter, it's like, okay, we don't have the critical success and we don't have the financial success. If we want to bring back, we need somebody who is actually going to bring back the series in a modern way. And this is probably the
Steve Miner?
Steve Miner. And this is probably, in fairness, the last time I will ever say this sentence. I understand where the Weinstein brothers are coming from in this decision. I do. It is a purely financial decision in the sense that they don't want to pay this guy $10 million, dollars, and I'm sure they would much prefer to pay the other guy significantly less. But two, there was a proven track record that maybe John Carpenter wasn't quite the director he once was in 1978. And if you really were banking on this film being the return of Laurie Strode, you want to make sure you had the director who was going to capture this, again, Scream franchise that you're chasing.
I just think it's interesting that they brought back someone who did more prominent movies from Friday the 13th. So not only do you have like a screamification, but you also kind of have an even more direct Friday the 13thification in directorial style.
You're definitely right on here. And the other interesting thing to note is that it really would have been cool to see Kevin Williamson work with John Carpenter. I mean, this is a guy who works basically seamlessly with Wes Craven. Now, we know Wes Craven's style is probably a little bit more adjacent, if you will, to Kevin Williamson. I mean, like I said, if you look at New Nightmare and Scream, those tones are actually pretty similar.
Uh-huh.
And I guess the argument against Carpenter would be that that's not. But if you're really thinking about it on just the macro level, Kevin Williamson worked with probably the second most important horror director of all time, at least in this era, with Wes Craven. It really would have been cool to see him work with the most important horror director of this time, with John Carpenter. But alas, it doesn't happen. We move forward. We get the guy who does Friday the 13th Part 2 and Part 3, and ends up going to have a career with Kevin Williamson. He ends up directing episodes of Dawson's Creek, continues kind of working in TV, I think even to this day. The formula of H2O is really obvious. Self-referential, upcoming young stars, pop culture references galore.
Mm-hmm.
That's what this film is to its largest degree. The one last aspect that I want to talk about, and this is going to be cool because I should just tease it now. This episode is not going to be Tris and I talking much because I got to do we are airing an episode of an interview that we did with Chris Durand, who plays Michael Myers in this film. He'll be talking about that. He'll even get to talk about The Mask, what it was like returning to the Halloween franchise, what it was like working with Jamie Lee Curtis, crafting it, how involved she was, all of that. So I will just say this episode's discussion is going to be short to save time for Chris. Branson will be joining me for that interview. But with that all said, there are some large points about this movie that we should address before we get into it. The biggest one being, Tris, do you want to kick it off or should I kick it off? There's a mask issue with this film.
I just wanted to say, since you brought up Chris Durand, that I really do love his performance in this movie as Michael, but his masks are awful.
He has 4 masks in this movie.
One of them is the best one, in my opinion, of the 4, is the Halloween 6 mask.
Yeah,
from
so
the opening.
And let me explain this for the people who don't know it because it gets really confusing with this film. There's 4 masks in this. The first one that he mentions is the placeholder that was used for Halloween 6. It's used for like 2 or 3 scenes in this movie. So that's the first mask.
And then we've got the KMB mask, which is the mask they used for most of production. It's actually on my Blu-ray box art, which is really funny because they axed this mask.
Yeah, this is the special effects company K&B. They are basically tasked with making a mask that will fit Michael Myers. Like you said, it gets axed. This one is in the film at scenes because of reshoots, not reshoots because of just not being able to reshoot everything.
Uh huh.
It's present, not as present as this next mask that we're going to talk about.
The CGI mask, or
Oh, sorry.
are we gonna talk about the main mask?
I was going to talk about the main mask because you're right. The CGI mask just kind of goes over everything. Talk about the third one.
I forgot what they nicknamed the third mask. Um,
This is the Stan Winston mask.
cool. The Stan Winston mask. This
Yeah,
mask is kind of a fusion of the Halloween 6 mask and also of the original mask with giant eyes. You can see Michael's
literally.
eyes the entire film that this mask is present. It is kind of horrendous. Um,
This is, you're right. This is probably the most atrocious mask in the franchise, quite honestly. This
apart
is a
from the CGI
mask.
mask.
Yeah, this is a mask that is designed by a guy named Stan Winston. If you're a huge movie nerd, you know who Stan Winston is. He is the guy that came up with the designs, the special effects for the Terminator and the dinosaurs for Jurassic Park. They ask him, can you make the mask for this movie? And I think we can understand where the design from this mask comes from really easily. This is a movie that is supposed to be the human connection between Laurie and Michael Myers. It's this 20 years, him still chasing her, her living with the fear of Michael Myers. By having the eyes or having the eye holes bigger, you get to see more of the face, you get to see more of the emotion from Michael Myers. That does two things. It allows Chris to have arguably a more expressive performance than
Hmm.
any of the other ones because literally you see more of his face. It also takes away from the mystique of Michael Myers.
Hmm.
He quite literally just he looks kind of like a guy in cosplay for chunks of the movie. That's the third mask. The
And it,
fourth one is a special one.
literally a special effects one.
Yeah, it's quite bad. And the fourth one is that
Is
it's a special effect mask.
it's they forgot to reshoot a scene where they had the KMB mask with the Stan Winston mask. So they decided to CGI the Winston mask on top of the KMB mask. And it is bad.
Here's
Like,
the thing. Here's the honest thing about it. We still have trouble CGIing mask over actors in 2022. You go and watch any mainstream superhero film where the character is wearing a mask, you can usually tell when the mask has been CGI or with a helmet or
yeah.
whatever you want to say. It's never been done to basically pure perfection. There's films that have done it better, but let me tell you, in one thing that 1998 was incapable of doing, it was CGIing the mask properly.
What I will say about the shots where we see this CGI mask, they are unnecessary. You can
Very.
you can have cut those shots, and honestly, the scene might flow better and might feel a little bit more fast paced. But that will create urgency if those shots are gone. But they're not gone; they're there, and that CGI mask is there, and it's really damn obvious, especially on Blu-ray, that it is a fake ass mask.
It is a really CGI looking mask, and the issue with all four of the masks, outside of like I said, you're right, the Michael Myers from Halloween 6 mask looks the best out of these. These are masks they never go back to in the franchise.
Hmm.
With Halloween Resurrections, they completely ignore what type of mask he's wearing.
And I have trivia about that mask once we get to that
Once
episode.
we get to that, yeah, like I said, it's an absolute disaster in the mask, and I think that's in some ways what's remembered about this film unfairly now. I think
Mhm.
there's a lot of it where it's just like, oh, think how bad that mask is. In reality, it is really distracting. I don't think it takes away much from the movie, but there are very certain scenes, especially the third final act of this movie, which I will just say is great. It's my favorite showdown between Michael and Laurie that's ever been in the franchise. I like it more than I like the Halloween 2018 stuff, which we'll get to when we get to those films. I think it's a really satisfactory ending. I think Jamie Lee Curtis is bringing it. I think Chris Durand is great as Michael Myers in this film. There's a lot to really like about this film.
Yeah, I agree. I think I liked the showdown in Halloween 2018 more just because when I first watched it, it legitimately terrified me.
Mm.
But this showdown with the score, with her and her axe, the way she takes control of the situation, her character arc in this movie is just done so beautifully. Like they, it's good stuff. It is good stuff.
Yeah, it definitely is. I also, and I think we're going to really shelf this part of the conversation for when we get into Halloween Resurrection and maybe even arguably the zombie films. But there is one idea that I want to start bringing up, and it's something I was reading about. And it's basically the idea of what 1980s slasher films have devolved into and what they say about movie going audiences. I was listening to Ebert and Siskel's basically talk about 1980s slasher films. Let me even clarify that further. There is an excellent podcast that was done by the Ringer channel in, I want to say, 2018 in anticipation of the new Halloween film that came out in 2018. This series was called Halloween Unmasked. It was done by a journalist, a film journalist by the name of Amy Nicholson, who's fantastic. She's one of the best working in film journalism today. She goes through, she's talking a lot about basically the legacy of Halloween. And it's specifically in this episode, she's talking about the sequels of Halloween. One of the things that is mentioned there is this interview or discussion, I should say. It's not an interview, it's this discussion Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel have on their show together where they're reviewing films. And it's this idea of the 1980s slasher films, what Siskel's so worried about. And basically, he is making this point throughout the film is, and I'm paraphrasing him, thrillers, extreme violence against women, being raped and stabbed to death. Uh, why are we getting them now? Why are we getting these films now in this day and age in 1980s? Like, why has this become the plethora of movies? His thesis is essentially as women's rights moves forward, as it becomes more prominent, there is a desire to see women basically be put back in their place. That is his whole argument. Now, whether you believe this argument or not, whether you believe Siskel is being maybe a little bit either too reactionary, too conservative, however you want to say that, he does present this really interesting point of horror films, and that is that specifically in the 1980s, the thrills come from the serial killer killing the women and not the other way around with in the case of Laurie Strode, where Laurie Strode is surviving and fighting Michael Myers. The thrills come from Michael Myers killing and dismembering these women. What I think Halloween H H20 does so well is I think it puts the attention back on Laurie. And
Yeah.
again, Siskel is not saying this is for every horror film. He's not saying this is the case for Halloween. He points that there are large examples of other films that would maybe disprove this theory. He's presenting this as a broader, more overall idea. And again, I'm probably doing a disservice to explaining it. I'll put the link down to his video because I actually think it is a pretty interesting discussion of basically psychology. But Tris, I just threw a lot at you right now. And
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of get your overview of not only what Siskel's saying, but the attention that this film gives back to Laurie.
I could definitely see where he's coming from. Like, especially in Halloween 5, where our main characters are just kind of frilly teenage girls, just being kind of dumb.
Hmm.
And then in Halloween 6, where Jamie, who is supposed to be one of our cherished main characters, is raped and brutally murdered.
Yeah, and
And
the
and
move. Oh, sorry. Go for it.
um, I will say that the better movies in this franchise are the ones where it the thrills come from the female characters taking down Michael. So that would be, or not taking down Michael, but escape or trying to escape Michael. So that would be Halloween, Halloween 4, Halloween H20, and then largely this new trilogy of Halloween films. I,
Yeah,
I say largely.
and there is this point that Siskel makes where he's pointing at one scene in particular in the Halloween franchise, and that's the bath scene in
And
Halloween 2, which he just describes as the only purpose for that scene is to titillate, to have a woman naked, and then to have her brutally killed. There is no remorse for that character. That is simply to see Michael just almost enacting just violence against women on screen for a
yeah,
minute. And like I said, when you look at it that way, there is definitely some understanding where that argument comes from. Now, again, I think if you look at it as a whole, I think, and as if you look at any form of analysis brought as a whole in an interpretation, I think you're always going to be able to put holes on it. I would encourage you to listen to Siskel's and Ebert's discussion on this, because I actually think it is quite fascinating, and I'm going to talk a lot more about it in Halloween Resurrection, because I think that film has some of those things that Siskel is really highlighting in this theory. But what H20 does so well is, like you said, it puts the attention back on Laurie Strode. She is a very strong character in this film.
mm-hmm.
She is a well realized, fully realized character who is able to essentially, she is the character we're rooting for. Michael is truly the terror of this film. Laurie is the one that we are rooting for. We are rooting for her to escape. We are rooting for her to survive and make it another day. And I think that's largely where the film works. And can we just talk about one last thing before we cut to the interview, Tris?
What?
There is a cast in this movie of about 7 people that you're going to hear a lot about in the future. At this point, they're not the biggest actors in the world, but again, they're young up and comers, kind of like the same thing where Scream is. You have, just to name a few, Josh Hartnett, who at this point in his career, Josh Hartnett has starred in the crime series Cracker, which I believe started airing in '96. In '99, you get the Virgin Suicides. In '98, you get the Faculty, Pearl Harbor, Black Hawk Down. This is a guy who's about to go on a run and become a really important actor for about 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Michelle Williams, who is still one of the most critically acclaimed actresses working in Hollywood today. I mean, she has a film coming out with Steven Spielberg literally in like 2 or 3 weeks. This is Michelle Williams as she's on Dawson's Creek. So she's one of the most important stars of that generation for that TV show, but she's not the biggest name in the world yet. You have people like Jodie Lynn O'Keefe, who's currently on Nash Bridges. She'll be in She's All That, I believe, the year after this movie. And then
Mm-hmm.
you have Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who is, of course, on Third Rock on the Sun at this point and will be on other shows and of course movies within the next 5 to 10 years. This is an all-star cast of people. You have also supporting it. You have Adam Arkin on the side. You have LL Cool J for a fun, memorable appearance. You have Jamie Lee Curtis, of course. It's a great cast.
Yes, it is.
It's probably the most stacked Halloween cast we have in any of the movies. These
Yeah.
are what, like at the very least 7 names you've heard of and who
Mm-hmm.
have like consistently worked. That's a good cast. Who's your favorite of this cast, of this new cast, I should say?
Michelle Williams.
She's the one who stands out, right? Like she is the
Yeah.
one that you watch and you're like, yeah, she's really good in this film. She plays the part well. I mean, there's a reason Michelle Williams is still the actress out of all of them that is getting the most consistent work with the most critical acclaim to this day.
Mm-hmm.
Those are kind of my overall thoughts on Halloween H20. Do you have any before we jump to the interview, Tris?
No.
Okay, perfect. Then, with that all said, thank you all for listening, and I hope you stay tuned because right now we are going to throw it to Branson and my interview with Chris Durand, star of Halloween H20, 20 years later. Chris Durand plays Michael Myers. It's a really great interview. Some of you might have heard it before. I added some stuff in it. So thank you all for watching, and check out this interview starting right now. All right, welcome to Ben and Brand See a Movie, our interview segment with one and only Mr. Chris Durand, who played Michael Myers in H2O. Chris, we are so honored to have you on our show today. How are you doing, man?
Doing great, man. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So you played Michael Myers in the 1998 film Halloween H2O, but we just wanted to hear real quick, man. What was your career in Hollywood before you got into Halloween?
So I kind of started in stunts in the late 80s. And I actually have a degree in archaeology, which has nothing to do with any of this business, right? Except that I like stories. I realize that's the connection. Mm-hmm. But then I had a very good friend who was a fabulous martial artist whose mom, Nancy Kwan, had been in some famous movies. She was the lead in The World of Susie Wong and the Flower Drum Song in the late 60s, both Rodgers and Hammerstein musicals. So she knew people in the business, and he kind of wanted to use his martial arts to do something. And so she contacted some of her stunt friends, and they got him started. And then through that, I kind of realized there's this job out there that incorporates everything I do anyway. It's storytelling. It's all the physical stuff that I love. It's film. It's a little bit of acting. It's all of that. Because I came from a family that had nothing to do with this business. Yeah. So I kind of discovered it that way. And then I pursued it. And it's a really difficult thing to get into. It was kind of a closed group. And it was a very small group in those days. There's probably 500 people that actually worked throughout all of Hollywood. So
in stunts specifically?
In stunts specifically, yeah. Now it's much, much bigger because people kind of got the idea of that it's out there and available. And, there's been a lot of behind the scenes things that kind of expose it a little bit. But when I started, I had to go meet people to introduce myself. So you would hustle. So I would find the sets and go find the coordinator and go up cold and introduce myself and try to get involved. And I ended up working with a guy named Ken Bates, who did cable falls. He kind of developed a thing called the decelerator, where he would do 200-foot cable falls on 1/8-inch cable. And you loop the cable down free and you jump to the end of the line, and then it plays through a system and stops you. And you have to do it all within very specific technical specs, because otherwise you could snap the cable. So I rigged with him because I used to do a lot of rock climbing. So I got in with him to start that way. And then I would go and sneak on the back lots and introduce myself, all in the in-between. And through time, it slowly builds. And the first job that I got, he helped me get, because we were using his equipment for stuff that had never been used before. And so they kind of got to have newer equipment and newer stuff. And I got to use it because I was familiar with it. So it was mutually beneficial all around. And serendipitously, it was a horror movie called Cameron's Closet.
Okay. So that was the first ever movie you worked on
that's the first one
whole ever in the industry
on camera. Yeah.
Do you remember like your first big stunt where you're just like, this is crazy even for me?
God, I'd have to think of what exactly it was, but there's been a number.
Yeah, because I've seen you in stunts before. I mean, I know you used to do you're you were Brendan Fraser's stunt double for a few movies. You take you take some crazy hard falls in Halloween H20.
Oh yeah.
Just like, so, I mean, was there ever a stunt to you that just stood out like that in your career where you're just like,
there was one that was really kind of nerve wracking. It was on a show called Gone Fishing.
Mhm.
And what happens is the bad guy is getting away. I'm doubling him. We're on airboats in the Everglades. And there's a seaplane, which is his guy in there, that is going to take off, but he's now being chased. So he can't just get on the seaplane and go. They've got to chase it down. He's got to transfer while they're moving.
Mhm.
So I went out, I looked at the thing, we figured it out. And then for about 2 weeks, we kept getting delayed. And then we finally got called back out and said, hey, the water level in the Everglades is going down. We got to go. Now, if you know anything about airboats and planes, there's prop wash off of everything. So I'm sitting up about 6 feet off the water. I've got a 1 foot step.
For our listeners, prop wash. When you say that term,
Prop
what
wash
exactly?
of the propeller from the plane
Okay.
is basically, because it's taxiing in the Everglades on water, it's just shooting water behind it.
Right. Okay.
It's not just air, it's actually water coming flying back. And the airboats, of course, are big fans as well. So they create their own airstream and et cetera,
Right.
et cetera. So now I have a seat that's elevated, and I've got one step that's about 8 feet in front of me and about 3 feet down. I'm going to step from the seat to that and dive for the plane. So it's a one move deal, and I got to duck because I'm taller than the wing.
oh, wow.
So when I go, I mean, you're 100% committed. You got to make that step and already be leaning forward at about 45, and then dive for the for the plane. And of course, you can't just get right up next to it, because you have the water from the plane coming off the back. So you've got to come up and over that and drop in. And there's no brakes for anything. So the first time we didn't go because you didn't quite get past, the hump there. And then the next time when we dropped in, all I remember is going now, and then I was holding onto the plane.
Wow.
But I had sunglasses on, a bag over my shoulder to complicate things. And it was as if somebody was standing there with a garden hose squirting my face. There was so much water. So it's really hard to see. And it's just really, really tight. So once you go, it's 100% commitment. And they told me if you miss it, just get flat, because we had 2 boats in the scene chasing my boat, and there's no way for them to dodge me. So they'll basically run you over. But the draft on those airboats is about 2 inches. I mean, they're right on top of the water. So they'll just dunk you under. They won't really get you.
Mm.
Wow. They'll chase down ducks and stuff in the Everglades and dunk them,
Wow.
and look out the back, and the duck pops up and shakes it off and flies away. So,
and how do you prep for that? Because there's obviously some stunts where it's you don't really get the preparation for it, in the sense that this is we have to shoot it on camera, but there is obviously preparation.
Setting my foots, my steps, practicing that on dry land. So you've got the boat sitting out of the water, and I can practice the move over and over again. And you have to just ingrain it, because when it's time to go, you can't be second guessing or thinking. It's got to be automatic.
All muscle memory.
It's all muscle memory. Yeah. I did one where we did this chase in Hollywood, and I was on the top of a double-decker bus. Well, I run up to the top, and there's a city bus going the other direction. There's a car that I'm trying to chase, and it's going the other direction, and the city bus is following it. So I run to the top of this double-decker, run across it, and dive off the top onto the city bus going the other way. And then it comes to a stop in traffic about 2 cars behind this guy, and I have to run down the bus, drop onto the roof of a car, and then my steps have to be set. It's kind of a right-left dive, and he's getting out of the car, and his door's open. I got to dive over him. So everything, the distancing, the footwork is exact. So you have to just ingrain it. But listen, all the gymnastic stuff I did over the years, your steps have to be on. And I used to pole vault in high school. And that's one of those things, your steps have to be correct. you have to learn how to count your steps and have the right distance to the box when you're going to plant the pole. So it was kind of ingrained at that point. But again, you set those motions, muscle memory, and when it's time to go, you don't have time to think about that. You just got to go.
And there's so, I mean, when you see a well executed stunt in movie or TV, like you mentioned, Gone Fishing, and I know that you were a stunt man in really big movies like Armageddon and Armageddon, correct?
Yeah.
And Winter Soldier and Demolition Man were three of like the big ones that I saw on your IMDb page. And there are so many aspects of it that you just don't think about as a viewer. Like I'd never really made the connection that there are marks that you have to hit, just like on normal sidewalk, except it's on a moving vehicle, and your next mark is on another moving vehicle that's 5 feet away from you, moving in a different direction at 30 miles an hour.
So one of the trickiest things is hitting those marks. You have to have good peripheral vision and good spatial awareness, obviously. Mm-hmm. But I've done fights where you get flipped and roll down a hill towards the camera, and you're trying to stop 2 feet from the camera on the mark while you've tumbled 20 feet down a hillside.
Yeah.
Wow. And you figure out how to get there.
And if I'm correct, you did a very similar stunt to that in H20, correct? Near the end.
Yeah. So yes. So if you want to talk about that one, so the van coming through the windshield was practical. So we built a platform even to the top of the dashboard and had a breakaway windshield. And I had to lie down. I had a couple cleats to brace myself, and very limited vision because of the mask. So if I kind of craned my head upwards a little bit to see what was coming, at the last second, I had to duck it so I could clear the windshield because they're not very tall. So I know it's coming, and then I got spit out blind, and then you recover in the air.
Wow.
But that sequence, we came in at about 45 and hit the brakes on the mark and spit me out. And then I rolled up, and then we did the whole sit up and stand up all in one shot. Oh, wow. That's crazy. You just keep going unless you get hurt or something's wrong.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You take the shot as far as you can. Tumbling down the hill, I did the whole tumble down the hill just free. We picked our spots, but then getting pinned, that last bit where I get pinned on the log, it's a very tricky thing because they had a van on a crane and they wanted to place it down, but you can't really place it well enough. I mean, it's swinging free. So there's no safe way to do it. And so I actually gave them the solution from having done this kind of stuff before, is we shot it in reverse.
Oh,
brilliant.
We started with me pinned and my back arched from getting crushed. And as they yanked the van away, I acted in reverse and rolled out of the scene. So I had to figure out exactly what my motions were for those last beats and then reverse them and time it with them yanking the van out. Wow. And that way I roll over and it pins me exactly right, and you arch out and the whole thing. So there's tricks like that they're technical. You got to make it look right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm not just saying this to pander to you. There's no way that I actually watched that final scene like quite a few times, partly because it was a really cool like climax of the movie, and partly because Ben and I unwittingly kept hopping on Voodoo at the same time.
Yeah, we kept kicking each other
so we kept kicking each other off. But I saw no seams in that. It looks completely clean.
That's
I would have never guessed that was done in reverse.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
There's a lot of tricks like that you have to incorporate to try to keep it safe.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously. I mean, nowadays they would probably say, hey, let's mat it together. They'll plant the van in one shot and then have you roll in and hit a mark on the second one. But this worked perfectly because, I'm squeezed in between the tree and that. So, it's dead on.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they yank it away, I just had to time it and do everything in reverse.
That's awesome. And then with the those stunts, what were the safety precautions that were taken? Like, were there crash mats available in the sort of jumpsuit that you wear as Michael? Or is there padding in there? Do you have like,
yeah, you do always leave room for pads, and you keep them as flat as you can, obviously.
right?
You don't want anything bulky and kind of obvious, like big fat knee pads or something. You try to minimize it. For stuff like that, I didn't need much because I had a pretty clear spot on the hillside. So like to tumble down, it wasn't a big deal. I probably had knees and elbows at the most. Maybe something for my hip, but that wasn't something. I mean, you basically feel it out each time. No, listen, none of us are trying to be heroes with this. It's all about getting the shot.
Yeah,
it's all about staying safe. It's not about egos and how tough you are or anything. That doesn't come into play. It's about telling the story well.
Yeah. And Chris, I just want to go back to like when you find out that you are auditioning, I guess, for the role of Michael Myers, like could you like kind of walk us through the process? Because I'll tell
you the whole thing.
Yeah.
So, essentially what happened is production looked at about 100 actors and they weren't happy with anybody. And realized that this role had traditionally kind of been done by stunts because it's a physical acting role. So Donna Keegan, who was the stunt coordinator, is Jamie Lee Curtis's double, or has been over the years for a lot of stuff. I think she did True Lies and a bunch of other stuff like that. So she was hired on as a coordinator for this and to double Jamie if there was anything needed. And she said, I'm not going to do a big cattle call. I'll give you 5 guys. They're all qualified. Pick someone. So one of them was her ex-husband, and they have a kid together. And I kind of thought she might be angling for him, just inside family business kind of stuff.
Of course.
Right.
Nepotism.
Yeah. And a couple of, 3 other guys that were all very well qualified. And I just went in, not knowing that it was a big deal. I mean, I kind of knew like, yeah, you're playing this lead bad guy. Okay, cool. Whatever. You go in and do it. And auditions, you typically go in and you do them and you forget about them. Otherwise you drive yourself nuts. Now, in a typical audition, if you go in and you have lines, they give you sides. And the sides are pages from the script that have your dialogue and the description of what's going on, etc. And generally there's scenes on either side of what they're giving you that are crossed out. Well, I learned years ago, you read all that. You read everything because anything like that might give you a clue to better audition for them. It puts it in context for you. So jumping ahead now, I go in and I'm basically talking to Steve Miner, the director, and a guy named Mark Catone, who was the first assistant director. And we're just kind of hanging out. They're looking over my resume and talking about kind of what I had as a background physically, et cetera. Just gymnastics and martial arts and rock climbing, all these things. And then they were talking amongst themselves for a moment. And they were saying that they weren't going to reference what came before. And so just like the sides for your audition, I shuffled that away somewhere in my memory. Is like, if, it's another clue to how to play everything, right? Well, came down to me and one other guy. The other guy had a bit of a spark in his eye, I guess. You could see he could kind of get hot easily. So they were a little wary of that. And they kind of said, who do you want to hang out with for the next 3 months?
Yeah.
And in addition to that, it turns out I was actually Donna's first choice to play the role. So that played a huge part in me getting it. Now, when I got the script and I got the word and it's like, yay, cool. Well, we're not doing what came before. So why look at any of them? We're not doing that. We're going to do our own thing. So I never watched them.
And any of the previous Halloween movies at all.
Because we weren't going to do what came before. So why? Right?
Yeah.
We're not doing that. We're going to do our own thing. Okay. I happily misunderstood them. They meant they weren't going to do any reference to 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah.
And the way this was going to play out was it was 1, 2, and H2O as the third and final installment.
Yeah.
But I say happily because I never got in my head about it, and I never second guessed anything or tried to mimic somebody. So then we get mask tests, and they line up all these masks and do a photo test with them, and we try some on, and they different lighting, decide what they want to do. And then we start filming a couple weeks after that. And here I am standing on set going, okay, the mask is scary to a certain degree. The lighting makes it scarier. The music, obviously, whatever the story is, whatever the action is. But that's it. I don't have any dialogue. I don't have any expression. You might see my eyes, maybe, right? Be scary.
There are a few very close shots of your eyes, mostly at the end.
They're into that beam, but I didn't know what we were up against, right? For the whole movie. So be scary. It's like, okay, you're just some guy in a mask walking around. So what do you do to be scary?
Yeah.
And so thankfully I wasn't trying to mimic Nick Castle or somebody. I just had to find this character and fall like, what is this guy about? What does he do? You know, how am I going to be scary? So I landed on being a big cat, like a tiger. And if you've ever seen a tiger lock on prey, it's frightening because you can't break that gaze, right? It's primal. It's as raw as it gets. So I would tilt my head down slightly and I'd lock on my target and I'd do this kind of low growl in my chest. And that's how I played him. And basically no news is good news. So if nobody's saying anything to you, it's working.
Yeah.
You don't get all the compliments. If something's wrong, you'll know about it. And Steve kind of let me figure it out and do my thing. They only ever showed me 2 scenes. They showed me the head tilt and said, this is kind of a thing he does. And I went, okay. Right before we shot it, they showed that to me. And I was more concerned about a technical aspect because it's the long shot of me doing the head tilt when I'm chasing the kids through the kitchen. And I was more concerned about stepping forward with a knife at the right angle and getting the glint off the knife and the whole thing. But, you incorporate that piece and it worked out great. And then the other was the closet from the original because we did a version of that. So they wanted me to understand why it was different. But that's it. Other than that, I'd never seen him.
And with that, I mean, like, you think of Michael Myers, and I mean, you put him right alongside of like Darth Vader, the Wicked Witch of the West, Joker.
Right.
Yeah.
So like you walk into that room, but having not seen the previous Halloween movies, does that make it easier for you to just kind of not have that pressure going into it, realizing like you're Michael Myers?
No, I had admittedly zero clue how big a deal it was. Which also was to my advantage because I never got in my head about it.
Yeah.
I never put pressure on myself that way because there was nothing to live up to. We were A, you're going to do our own thing, and B, I didn't know what the fan base was like.
Yeah.
Until I was filming, and you've got, doctors and lawyers and moms and nannies and whoever want your autograph, and you're like, oh, okay, this is strange.
Yeah. So you really had no clue, like,
I had no clue
that this was going to be a huge huge film for you, really.
No, I mean, obviously I'm one of the leads in the film.
Yeah.
So that was what was huge for me. And getting to play a character, I was number 2 on the call sheet. It was Jamie then me. Right. So that's pretty exciting.
Of course.
But I didn't have all the background to weigh me down.
Yeah.
Which was good because I approached it in a more organic way. And I basically figured out that this character is kind of an archetype character. And if you know what archetypes are, it's like, there's a father figure, there's a warrior figure, there's a killer, etc. So that's who he is. I mean, it's really simple. He's a killer, and it's pure that way. And to do him simply makes it more powerful because it's not frantic. It's not frenetic. I'm not chasing anybody down. I'm there. I'm in their psyche and I'm coming and you can't stop me, but I'm not in a hurry. Right.
Yeah.
It's like most of the time I'll get you, right? There's nothing you can do about it. And that's even more frightening because it's taking time And
Yeah.
because you know you have no out, that's worse because now you have to sit with it and linger with that. And that's a horrible feeling, right?
Mhm.
You know, it's almost better if that tiger attacked you and took you out in 2 seconds, right? You're gone. But with Michael, it's like it's the stalking, it's the psychological fear, it's the buildup. That's a big part of this whole thing.
It's the idea of having to come face to face with your own demise.
Yes, but you have to really you have to kind of sit with that and linger with that thought. You can't. It's not quick necessarily. It can be, but the stalking is the part that's really scary.
Mhm.
So the scene where I stab Adam and lift him up in the hallway,
Which is my favorite kill in the movie, just straight up.
Okay.
Like that kill's so awesome.
Yeah, that
and
was brutal.
that kill has nothing to do with Adam.
Mm.
That kill has everything to do with messing with Jamie. Because
Yeah.
I'm lifting him up, he's twitching, and I'm staring her down, and I'm holding him, and I'm holding that moment where she's really seeing it and experiencing it fully, and then I rip the knife out and go for her. So it really is to mess with her more than anything.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying? It's not. I'm not like kill this guy and I'm 100% and kill. I'm after her,
Yeah.
right?
It's all
And
means to an end.
and you've brought up
Yeah.
Jamie a few times. And I mean, we all knew Jamie Lee Curtis was just a wonderful actress in everything she's ever done. And this one, I think she's just fantastic as Laurie Strode. You two obviously have the relationship in the film being brother and sister. And what I love about your relationship in this film is it very much feels like you guys are going toe to toe with each other. And it feels like you two are the only ones who truly understand each other in this world. I'd have to assume, just based on everything of the final 20 minutes, with really, it's really just you two squaring off finally. Like, is she just like great to work with on set in the sense that like she's going with it at you? Because it just doesn't seem like they cut with her. It looks like she is doing the choreography with you for the most part.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Jamie is incredibly hands-on.
Yeah.
To a fault, where I mean it this way. Like, listen, if I back up and I'm doing a stunt and I'm in makeup and wardrobe and I'm ready to go and people are setting pads, I cannot help set pads because I'm camera ready,
Mhm.
right? So I can't be involved in that aspect of it. Same with Jamie for every other aspect of the film. So she wants to jump out and help move a light, or she wants to, you know, whatever you can think of on set. She wants to jump in and be part of it, but she can't because the film is based around her,
Mhm.
right? And if something happens to her moving a light, the whole film's down.
Do you think
So
that's
against
more?
her nature, she has to hold back, right? But then when she obviously is doing her bit, she gives it her all. She actually made it harder on me, not easier, for sometimes, because what I would typically do is I would not interact with whoever was in the scene with me before we did the scene. I would separate myself. So, for instance, when I have Josh and Michelle at the door, and they've locked the door, they've dropped the keys, and here I come. I avoided them for like an hour beforehand. And when they were lining up with them on the camera, I was getting ready across the courtyard, stacked up behind the camera so they couldn't even see me. And when they said, "Are you ready to come over?" I said, "Just roll when you're ready and I'll be there." And I hid behind and came at an angle where they couldn't see me coming from behind camera. And by the time they said, actually got to action, I was there in full force, at full speed, at full intensity in their face. So it lends, it helps the scene. It helps the intensity of the scene.
Mhm.
Jamie would come up to me and get in my face, and I'm going to kick your ass. And I'm like, "You're making it hard on me." But at the end of the day, you focus in and you buckle down and get it done.
Mhm.
But I agree. I think that whole end of the movie is really about that duel.
Would you say that, because you mentioned like that idea of wanting to like get help with a pad or help set something up, and with Jamie helping set up a light, do you think that this is kind of a real quick question, but do you think that's more of a control thing? Like I want to have it's more just like, I want to help you guys.
I want to make it happen. And I see
Okay.
you working and you need a hand. So 2 things that she did. One was we were getting ready to do the stunt out of the van window. And so one of the things you do, obviously, we know roughly where I'm going to land coming out of the van. So you go around and it's probably 2 a.m. and you pick up all the little rocks that might be there. You clear the ground of anything that might hurt you that way. And she walked by in the middle of us doing this and said, "What are you guys doing?" We explained it, and she jumped right in and started picking up little rocks and tossing them to the side. That's something she could do. When you get to 100 rolls of film, traditionally you pass out champagne at lunch. Lunch is whatever the meal is. So if you start at midnight and you break 6 hours later at 6 a.m, that's lunch, right? So it doesn't matter when it is. It's based on when you start. And at lunch that night, she passed out the champagne herself. She walked around the whole thing and passed out champagne while we were eating. So she likes to be involved, and she will involve herself in any way she can. And there's just some things you can't do if you're being smart about it.
Did that help you kind of like gain more respect for her? Like, did you see her like, oh, that's really cool that she is doing that?
Yeah, no, I love that with people who are involved and want to know what's going on. So listen, I did an episode of Seinfeld years ago, early on in the show, in an episode called The Opera. And there's a character called Crazy Joe Davola who's dressed up as an opera clown, and he gets jumped in the park by some guys and beats them up.
Oh, that's you?
That's me beating them up.
I just saw that episode again recently. It's
Okay.
they just said it on Netflix, so I've been watching a little bit of it.
So the reason I bring this up is we were there for a long time that day, and we were outside in the afternoon choreographing this whole thing and getting it ready, and we were waiting for them to finish filming inside. And they finish, and Seinfeld disappears, and he's not part of the scene. And we go out to the park, and it's night, and they light it, and we do the whole thing, and we film it, and we're done. And here comes Seinfeld out of the shadows to thank me. So he was involved even when it wasn't him.
That's
right.
Cool.
He was oversighting things and making sure and wanting to see what it was and, make sure it was right. So same kind of an attitude. The people who are really involved just want to do a good film, and they'll help in any way they can.
Yeah. And you can really feel like the passion Jamie Lee Curtis has for this film. Like, it really does feel like a passion project and a love. And not only is it so interesting seeing Jamie Lee Curtis, this film is literally becomes a who of the up and coming like generation of actors. I mean, from Adam Arkham, Michelle Williams, Joseph Gordon-Levitt briefly in there. Like, I think that's what makes this film so special is you just have a great cast around you. And was that something you guys felt on set? Like, I'm sure, did that bring an energy to the film where it's just like, we're all making something special here?
Yeah. I mean, I think you can tell people that are fairly seasoned or that kind of have that it factor. And I knew that, and some of the people coming up, had done enough things when they were younger that you could kind of know, yeah, they're good. And others like Josh, that was his first feature.
Yeah.
And then he went right to the top. I mean, went straight to the top. But he could handle it, so I saw that immediately with him. I mean, I was lucky because you're coming in doing a horror movie and I had all A-list actors around me. So that helped obviously make it a better product in the end of the day. Come on, we even had Janet Leigh there.
Yeah.
Was there a point in it? Because you mentioned that you hadn't seen any of the other Halloween movies and you weren't sure, you didn't have any idea of how big this was going to be. And then in light of all that and just the cast, was there a moment during production where you were where you realized what this movie could be, or what part it played in the grand scheme of horror as a genre, or, how much of a powerhouse this movie could be?
I knew that the movie was going to be really good partway through when we were doing things like flipping the tables, or I was doing the scene. confronting her at the window, those kind of things that made it really powerful.
Mm.
I knew we had something really good in terms of kind of the hierarchy of horror and how it would do overall. I don't think I really knew.
Mm.
I didn't have a sense for that. I was kind of more focused just on the one-off at the time. Now I realize it's like, wow, what a big deal. And we did a lot of good stuff and it made an impact on people. And it got a whole new generation interested in the whole franchise.
Yeah.
Which is neat.
Yeah, of course. One of the things that you just mentioned there is, of course, that 20-minute sequence at the end. Some of the stunts. I just wanted to break down some of these stunts with you. I think there's like 3 stunts at the end that you can kind of just point to, like A, B, C. The first one is you flying through the window after, I think it's. Are you shot? I think you're shot in this scene, or you're stabbed and you go through the school window.
Going off the balcony?
Yeah, off the balcony.
Yeah, stab. She drives me back, and then we did a fall off the balcony, and then we did the impact shot into the table.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a scaffold next to the table, and we had the table set to collapse partway.
Mm.
And then Donna was really worried about me because I climbed up partway on the thing, and she's like, that's good. Don't go too hard.
Mm.
It's harder to watch somebody do a stunt than it is to do it, to be honest, because you have no control when you're watching.
Mm-hmm.
So she was pretty nervous about it, and it's like, the camera's here. Don't go too big. And it's like, well, I want to do it once. I always want to do it once, and I want there to be enough of an impact. So I went, fine, you got it, no worries. And then they rolled cameras and they climbed up a little higher and it dropped off.
Yeah.
It's not as bad as it seems sometimes because the table collapses, which takes part of it. And I'm padded, and it's still a thump, you guys. There's some that you just have to do to get the shot. I mean, going back again to the scene in the hallway with me stabbing at him and lifting him up to get the drop. We could lift him up with cables and have him do his bit, but to get the drop, we had his double, and he had to jump up in the air and then go flat to his back, and it's a concrete floor.
Yeah.
There's no easy way to do that.
Yeah.
And my concern was timing my part and making it look right, ripping the knife out, because I had to lift with him with the knife and then rip it out as he fell so that he wouldn't have to do it multiple times.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, let's do this once and be done with it. And we did. So,
that's incredible.
Yeah, sometimes it's just a thumper, you guys.
And how many, because I know obviously a film isn't shot necessarily chronologically. With these, I think like this last, again, 20, 25 minutes of the film, is it over the course of a few weeks or is it really like a few days? Do you remember?
No. So we were set for, I want to say 8 weeks originally for filming. And then they decided to change the mask 5 weeks in. So we had to read a bunch of stuff. So it ended up being 10 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those things take weeks to get set and done. And, you're jumping around completely out of order sometimes. But it is what it is. You got to get it done. Even if you have to redo it, you got to bring it again.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that's been a big debate amongst Halloween fans that I just learned about today was the mask was how many times it changes in the film. And I was wondering if you could give us a definitive answer of what you remember.
Sure. So what happened is K&B, the company, made the mask that they originally okayed to start this. And if you know anything about film, they take the footage from the day and they send it off and they process it and you usually bring it back the next day or maybe 2 and you watch the footage. It's called dailies. So you watch daily to see what you're doing and how you're doing. So they saw the mask on film for weeks.
Yeah.
So if they were going to change it, they had plenty of time to do so. And it was literally 5 weeks in on a Friday that we get the message that they want to change the mask. And we're filming the interior of the beginning when I slit the nurse's throat.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. I go to the kitchen, I get the knife, we do that whole thing. So we shot it with the KMB mask. And then I think they sent over the mask from 6, if I'm not mistaken. And we shot it with that. And Steve lit it really dark on purpose. And there was a big brouhaha. And by Monday, we had a different mask.
So is it only two masks in total?
That's known as the Winston mask. And the Winston mask, we ended up with one of them for the whole film, the rest of the film. And I mean, as it was, they were very protective of the first one. But with the Winston, I mean, that they guarded that sucker. So if I came on set, I'd get everything on and ready, which I could do in a few minutes. It was easy. And then the mask would come out of the box off of the little mold onto my head. When we finished, I'd peel it off. I'd hand it back, go back in the box. And they locked that sucker down because they didn't want it to walk.
Mm-hmm. Was there a what was the favorite stunt or scene that you participated in this whole thing?
So I can break them down this way. So one of the coolest scenes was coming down from the ceiling, which was which was a spontaneous thought, meaning we were there. We knew I was coming from somewhere. Steve goes, "Are you going to rise up behind? Are you going to come from the corner? Are you going to, trying to figure out what he wanted to do?" And he saw this pipe up in the ceiling. And he goes, "Can you fit up there and come from there?" And I went, let's grab a ladder. Let's see. And I jumped up in there and squished myself in and then lowered down. And it became one of the iconic scenes. So that was like one of the cool scenes that paid off really, really well. Probably the most fun to film was flipping the tables.
Oh, okay.
It looked very fun.
Yeah, because you get to really have an attitude with the whole thing. And it's also kind of the concept of a reverse wave, as I put it. If you're being chased down by a wave of something like a tidal wave, right, it's scary. But I'm doing the reverse. I'm doing this undercut wave going, where are you going to hide now? How about now? And I'm just taking away all of her safe spots. And she's got nowhere to go. And I can do it kind of powerfully and with an attitude coming after her. So it made it really frightening. Probably another cool scene and fun to do was the window when we first come face to face.
Yeah, I mean the iconic scene in the movie.
Yeah,
but that had to have a real specific intensity to it and a couple of layers on it. So that was fun to do because, I'm showing up kind of in predator mode, like I would say, as the kids slam the door, like, boom, I'm there. And there she is. And then there's this kind of a moment of, oh, hi, sis. How's it going? And then I did another piece, which cut out, rightfully so, where I kind of peeled away slowly and turned. But it worked better. That should never have been used anyway. But you always overdo the scenes, you guys, and you trim them and you use the part that's powerful because it's better when she goes down for her gun, pops up, and I'm gone. That's scarier. So the edit worked better that way than to see me go anywhere. Because if you see me go anywhere, then it's on right then.
Yeah, you can establish where the threat is.
Right, and as soon as you can get your claws into that, so to speak, then you can deal with it. But if you don't know where it is again, you're off balance. And so it keeps it all off balance. And then I think probably one of the trickiest scenes was the end reaching out because we knew before we started H20, we knew that the device to carry the franchise forward was going to be a switch at the end. Okay. And of course, you don't want to let the audience know that because this is supposed to be the end and the final in a trilogy. So the deal was, in order for Jamie to get to kill me off and have the ending she wanted, they had to have a certain amount, I think it was 2 minutes or less of screen time for the next movie so they could carry the franchise on. And the only way they could do that was to do this switch with the paramedic and the mask and the whole thing. So we knew that before we went in that device was going to be there. So now put yourself in my shoes. I have to be 3 people. I got to be a paramedic who's just gotten the snot knocked out of him, kind of going, what's going on? Help me. I had to be Michael, who just got slammed, is going, what have I done? Right. And you're my sister, help me. And then I had to be Michael going, just touch me. Just make contact and it's over and I'll finish this. And all of those levels kind of had to play. And Steve just, again, kind of let me do what I thought was right.
Yeah.
And it actually reads differently each time you watch it, depending on your mood. Right. And of course, nobody knew the paramedic part of it until Resurrection came out. Right. And then they look back and go, oh, that makes sense. And now you can see it in a different light. So it had to work on multiple levels. So that was super, super tricky. So that's probably the one I'm proud of.
Yeah.
Acting wise, because I had to pull off something really subtle. And again, what have I got? My hand and my eyes.
Yeah, I was gonna say, as far as acting goes in this, it's difficult, I'm sure, to play this nonverbal part, because what we think of as actors is so much dialogue and how you deliver that dialogue. But the way that you deliver so many things, I think the scene where you and Jamie first come face to face is a perfect example, because you have, even with your face covered, you can almost see almost like this Arrested Development sort of thing going on. Not Arrested Development, the show, but like as a child, even though you're an older Michael Myers who has, gone through the system, so to speak, and has escaped, you still have that childlike mindset, and you portray that so well with, the little head tilts, and you have this look in your eyes. What was the strategy that you did for those specifically up close moments where you really did have to act for it, like where you had to show that emotion?
Well, you have to be in the moment there. So again, it's kind of separating yourself from people on set, so you're not kind of chit-chatty beforehand, so you can focus. But really, it comes down to, your eyes say a lot. Okay, you can speak with your eyes quite well. And the little subtle physical movements, like the head tilt and kind of there was a curiosity to him at that point. Okay. Meaning, he just got interrupted from toying with his prey. Right. And it's like, oh, I remember you. Hi, sis. There's a little bit of that whole thing. So I kind of got that in my head. Like, hey, I get to see my sister again. And it's like, I'll be back. Right.
Yeah.
So it's like, you screwed up my game. I'll be back. And so I just kind of got the scene in my head in that sense. It's like little beats of full intensity after them, a moment of recognition, and then like, okay, you want to play, huh? And and then pull back and get out of there. But that, again, they cut that last bit, rightfully so, but you still have to play it through. It's better to have it to cut, you guys, always, than to not have it. So.
Sorry to interrupt. It almost sounds like you had sort of a pseudo script going on in your head, where like, even though you weren't saying anything, there were like things that you imagined Michael saying.
Yes, for sure. Yeah,
that's a really
for sure. There's those beats, those emotional beats so it's an emotional script.
Yeah,
is maybe the best way to say it. So there's kind of beats that you have to hit emotionally, and you kind of got to be in the moment for that and forget everything. So this is one of those weird times when like the world has to disappear, right? There's times when you're doing stuff technically. Listen, whenever you're filming, the fourth wall goes up and you do your bit, but sometimes they're a lot more important than others. And these are the ones we just kind of let everything go and really think about what that connection is, and be connected to that other person, and everyone else is gone. So it's just me and Jamie for those beats.
Very personal.
Right? And cameras, whatever, they're not there. They don't exist. So you've got to kind of get in that headspace, and like you said, it's an emotional script at that spot, because I don't get dialogue.
Yeah. And we don't want to keep you much longer, but as we start kind of getting to the end of you've now played Michael Myers. The movie is now coming out. You're at the premiere, all that, et cetera, et cetera. Now there's this moment where you are Michael Myers. And for a lot of people now growing up, this is probably their first movie that they've seen in theaters of Michael Myers. Like,
Sure.
that's got to be a really special thing for people to come up to you and be like, "You're Michael Myers." Like, the most iconic horror icon of all time, like right next to Freddy Krueger.
We've been describing it as like the horror Mount Rushmore.
Yeah,
Right.
you're literally you're the Washington of Rushmore for horror.
That's a good way to put it. So the way I liken it, you guys, is we're the second coming, or the second trilogy this way. And if you think about horror movies and you go back, and it's Frankenstein, Dracula, Wolfman, kind of the original trilogy. And then the second round of those iconic characters is Michael, Freddy, Jason. Okay. And so it's basically like getting asked to play Dracula.
Yeah.
Right. You know, it's a big deal. Thankfully, again, I didn't know that at the time. So I might have worried about it. I might not have, who knows? But yeah, that's funny. The Mount Rushmore works. It's incredibly flattering. It's incredibly humbling when you kind of have introduced people to something that they've now followed and continue to follow and will continue to follow for years.
Yeah.
And
Especially now that Halloween Kills just came out. It's still going.
It's still going. Right. I mean, even if they stop completely making Halloween movies, they will be around forever. So having my spot in that pantheon, if you will, is pretty crazy. I have kind of a secondary one because I was Ghostface in Scream 2.
Yeah.
So but that's more of Scream is always in its own category.
Yeah. It almost builds with what like Michael Myers, Freddy, all of them did, and takes its own like fun approach to it.
It's a fun approach, right?
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be one of them, right? Messing with the other ones and getting the other ones, not an actual character. It's one of them doing it, and you're always trying to figure out who done it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of comedy involved, etc.
Yeah.
But when you get back to something like Michael, it's straight up, like I said, it's that archetype character. So it's classic.
Yeah.
And if you look at it in those terms, in those really base killer terms, and don't complicate things, it plays that way, and it plays well for a reason.
Yeah. And that's really cool that you specifically got to be in this, because we were talking about it last week when we were talking about A Nightmare on Elm Street. And there's this like feeling where like you put the two guys up there, you'd say it's John Carpenter and you'd say it's Wes Craven. You got to exist in both worlds, where you got to exist in Wes Craven's creation, John Carpenter, and then you're also getting into this film feels not exactly like Scream, but it definitely has some influence on Scream, but it's also starting to get to this low budget horror film that we start seeing from Blumhouse a few years later. Like you're in this
indie.
Yeah, you're almost in like this perfect sweet spot of like you hit like every square of what will be the horror franchise. Like this film really is in that thing where it's like every horror movie kind of has this center thing around H2O. Not saying they all pull from it, but it's just like it comes at this perfect time.
Yeah, it kind of was pivotal with the timing and how we did things. Listen, Halloween fans are funny because they love H2O or they hate it.
Yeah.
They love the first one, they hate it. And they argue back and forth endlessly. But there seems to be something there for everybody, and you get a reaction. And what I always tell people is, had I played Michael differently, there would be a different group of people who love it and a different group who hate it.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, I tried to keep it honest and do what I thought was right. And that's all you can do. Right. And bring an intensity to it and a purpose to the character that would hopefully resonate and last.
Yeah.
So, and you know, it makes me feel great when people come up to me. It also makes me feel old at this point. That was the first thing I saw. And you're like,
It's been just
It's now
over
been
20 years.
When 2018,
Yeah, 2018.
David Gordon's version came out. That was
It's been
H2O,
23 years or
H40, I
something.
guess,
Yeah.
Yeah.
at that point. But
Yeah.
how does that like context of being Michael Myers change all of a sudden when you have kids and they're starting to get of that age where like horror movies are starting to become like the thing teenagers see, and then like all of a sudden their dad's Michael Myers? I mean, I'm sure to some degree they just think it's lame because everything like kids just think
Well, yeah,
everything their parents do is lame.
I'm Papa. It doesn't count. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
What it is there's a certain bragging rights that goes with that for
Yeah,
them.
Yeah.
And they've never seen it. And
Yeah.
surprisingly, my older boy, who's old enough to see it, has never watched it because we wouldn't let him for so long. But I think it's just off his radar.
Mm.
And the other is too young still to even consider it. But
yeah.
eventually they'll see all that stuff, and they've, hopefully they're proud of it down the road.
Yeah. And I want to grab something real quick to show you.
Yeah.
But Branson, go on real quick.
I've got another question for you in that same range. Like, even though your kids haven't seen it, have you been a horror fan before, or are you like fairly new to it because of H2O? And how did being on or being in H2O, like, did it give you an appreciation for old horror movies or an appreciation for new horror movies?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really watch too many horror movies, in all honesty, because, scary movies scare me.
Go figure.
Yeah, right. No, it's not my favorite genre to watch for me, but I would say having to navigate horror movies throughout my career, because I did a lot of stuff on the Maniac Cop movies, a movie called Uncle Sam, a bunch of other things. I did one of the main zombies on Resident Evil Extinction. There's a bunch of other stuff that I've done over the years that are horror based. So there's a certain way that I think horror movies should be told. That's the most effective. So I learned a lot by having to be the one responsible for pulling it off. And, on my end anyway, make my part of it scary and effective. Yeah. And to me, usually less is more. I want to leave more. It goes back to the Psycho idea of what do you really see in the shower scene?
Exactly.
Okay, you don't, but you fill in the blanks.
Yeah.
And I'd rather you fill in the blanks, because you're going to do more. What scares you more than I ever will.
Exactly.
Right?
Like
so if I leave you with certain images in your brain that I planted, and you have to fill in, you're going to fill in something worse than I will.
Yeah.
Probably. Or more apropos to you, right?
Our psychology is always going to make it 1,000 times scarier than anything you can ever put on screen.
Right. But each of you guys has a different psychology, so each of you will picture it differently. So if I can set the stage and let you finish filling in the blank, that's a really effective way to do stuff. Now, there's times when obviously you have to see everything and you got to pull it off. I don't tend to like gory. Yeah. I think that takes away from it. I think psychological is much better. So to answer your question, I think there's a psychology that goes behind this, and that's what's interesting to me. And that's yeah.
Oh, sorry. Just a few more questions, because I know Halloween fans would just hate me if I didn't ask you this. Have you gone back and seen the Halloween, or have kept up with the franchise? And if you
I know story-wise what's going on, but I haven't watched them. It's, again, lately it's one of those things where, you have kids, and
of course,
and it takes all your time, which is fine. But I will tell you, I am writing the second in a trilogy that is a horror-based trilogy. I have another one that the first one is done, and the other two are on deck after that. And I am signed on for something that I had to sign a non-disclosure for, so I can't say much, but it's another very big series based upon Halloween.
Exciting. Are you able to tell us once we stop the recording?
No.
Okay.
That's not how non-disclosures work.
Darn. Okay,
No,
I wasn't sure if that was like if
like
it was
a real
that.
non-disclosure. No,
Yeah.
real non-disclosure.
Okay.
We'll just have to have you back on once it gets announced.
Yes.
Absolutely, you guys.
But so the question for the Halloween fans is, what is your favorite kill in your film? And if you've seen any of the other kills, what's your favorite kill in the franchise?
Let me see. Favorite kill for me. Oh God. Well, I mean, Adams was one of them for sure.
Adams is
that
so
was
good.
That was by far the scariest one for me.
Yeah, I
Lifting
think
of him and
that was
twitching.
kind of the freakiest one.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, so I would probably go with that. I mean, when I got Jody, you don't really see it. You see the aftermath. But that was kind of a cool one too to do, because that became a very iconic scene again. He's stabbing down with that big old knife. So, yeah. No, I think there's a bunch you don't see, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Joseph Gordon-Levitt's, you never see him like put the ice,
You see the aftermath again.
Yeah.
which is like
Jody's usually-
scarier almost.
Yeah,
I think.
Jody's you see me stabbing, but you just see the aftermath, right?
Yeah. And you're even involved in like, I guess like one of the cooler kills himself where like Michael Myers gets killed himself. Like that head cut off is brutal and like a
Right.
great end to that like franchise or what it would be at
Such
that
a
point.
quick like.
Well, one non-disclosure there. That was the only shot that wasn't me.
That explains a whole lot.
Yeah.
Would have been a much
No.
different interview if it had
Yeah.
been you.
Right, exactly. No, but I think the finality of that shocked people in a good way.
Mhm.
Some people were just absolutely loved it. Some people were in mourning after that.
Yeah.
But I think so. The one complaint that I will then defend about the movie is people say it's too short because it's fairly quick.
It is a very quick pace.
84 minutes, I believe.
Yeah. 86. Yeah.
Something like that, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Very
In
short.
the
So-
range. Yeah.
Right. But the reason I'll defend that is, did you want more?
Yeah.
Pretty much. Everyone wanted more.
Yeah.
That means we stopped at the right time.
Yeah.
Okay. Because what you want to do is have that energy going, and you want to leave people ramped up.
Yeah.
Okay. And there was no kind of false ending. There was no Terminator where you think it's over 5 times before it's over, right?
I think that was actually one of the things that we talked about when we talked about
Terminator was just the fact that just like keeps going way too long.
It goes too long, right? But with this, you think it's done, and she's the one who doesn't trust it,
Mhm.
right? So she's the one who steals the body and knows she's got to go finish it.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's smarter that way. The other thing I got to tell you about this movie that I thought was really, really smart and well done was that she's not happy-go-lucky 20 years later. She's not over it.
Yeah.
You know
I
what I
love
mean?
that
She's-
element of it.
She's
Very
a disaster, right? And then you add in that layer that her son is the same age that she was.
Oh, I
was
never. That's
originally
totally
attacked.
true.
Uh-huh. So
Didn't
now,
catch that. That's good.
okay, so it's just like I talked about earlier. It's harder to watch a stunt than to do one. Okay. Well, if she's worried about facing Michael, or she's worried about her son facing Michael, which do you think is worse?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
The stakes for her are through the roof.
Yeah.
And she's hallucinating, she's drinking, she's taking pills, she's doing all this stuff. And of course, we know I'm real. She doesn't for quite a long time, and she doesn't really know I'm real until that moment at the window.
Mhm.
So you got to realize the tension on the one side of it is us all going, he's real, and her having had hallucinations and not sure until we come face to face. That's what makes that pay off so well.
Yeah.
Right? That's
And
what makes it so powerful, because now it's like, oh, it's on.
Yeah.
Right?
And that
And then it
relationship,
turns
like I
around.
said, you
Right.
two
And then
have.
when she turns around to go back and gets the axe, that's another really powerful moment of like, oh, it's going down now. We're finishing this, right? And that's became that, and it's what you talked about. Now it's 2 of them. It's always been 2 of them, but now it's really 2 of them,
Yeah.
right? And it's on.
Yeah. I just like I said, I absolutely love what you and Jamie Lee Curtis do in those final like 20 minutes. I think it's like some of the most exciting stuff in the franchise and just in film in general. I mean, two iconic characters finally facing off.
Because there are actual stakes and there's like an actual fight going on. Her character is competent, like Carrie Tate / Laurie Strode is confident and capable of taking on your Michael Myers. And
she's not just scrambling away and running, but she would have left. If you think about this, she probably would have left had it not been for her son.
Yeah.
He sends off and says, that's not okay. Right? The stakes are even higher. It's not just about her. It's about her and me, but her stakes are higher because she knows if she loses, it goes to him next. Right? And the only way to protect him is to go on offense. Yeah. So it's a powerful switch, you guys. It makes it made the franchise in that sense, like, I think it was a good finale.
Yeah. And it's what David Gordon Green brings into the role when he reboots it 20 years later with his Halloween and Halloween Kills, was he still has that basis idea of what your H2O establishes. Again, they take out the relationship with their brother and sister, but it's really between these two characters and now her kid and grandkid. So you guys really set the bar for that.
Yeah.
What's so crazy about all these stories is you got to figure out timelines now. There's like the sister trilogy, and there's the in-between stuff, and then there's Rob Zombie stuff, and then you come back and you watch one and then the new one, and it's like
and then you have three just off the side. Season of the Witch just doing its thing,
licking the radiator.
Do you guys know the story for Season of the Witch?
Isn't the whole thing with Carpenter is essentially he wants to make Halloween an anthology series? So Halloween 3 is the first time with the witch. And then in theory, he wants to do it yearly where it's a different like Halloween type creature.
Halloween verse.
So the original idea was to do a different Halloween story every year. Okay. But then the original Halloween hit.
Yeah.
And they made a ton of money.
Yeah.
And so they made a sequel to that with Michael because they made a ton of money. And then they tried to go back and do the original idea, but they still call it Halloween. So everyone wanted Michael. So it was a big mistake.
Yeah.
Right. They should have just had a separate movie called Season of the Witch and been done. Right. But they kind of tried to have their cake and eat it too. Okay. Yeah. They made money, made a sequel, and then tried to go back to the original idea. And it's like, and then everyone got mad.
You end up duping everyone.
Which is like that film gets not hate on, because I think at this point it's kind of become an underappreciated gem in the franchise. But at the time, it just was like everyone like, what is this? When it's like actually legitimately great, scary movie. It's like what it is, but it just couldn't hit it without Michael.
Well, and that was their problem, is they'd established Michael with the Halloween name.
Yeah. I mean, he's synonymous with it now.
Yeah. Well, you can't separate the two once that happens. And they kind of made the mistake of backpedaling and going off to a side note. And didn't work.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Chris, so much for joining us. Before you leave, we have one more thing. Is we usually do a segment called The Great Debate, where usually we have it's Branson and I going off each other, but I had a question for you that I just wanted to see if you had an answer for real quick. So it's a random question, and mine's is based on all the films that we've gone recently. We've gone the Batman versus Superman's, Captain America Civil War, Godzilla versus Kong. You are given the option to reprise Michael Myers. Who do you want to face off in a Michael Myers versus blank movie? Like, what would be, if you got to just choose, who would you want to go up against in all of movie, the lexicon of film?
Well, I mean, I'll keep it to kind of the Mount Rushmore group right now. But I think the fun one, probably the best actiony one, would be Jason.
Okay.
For a variety of reasons, just because they're different style. But to me, Michael's going to win.
Yeah.
And it's just because of again, it's kind of that steady ruthlessness. The way I describe him, he's kind of the Energizer Bunny of killers, right?
Yeah. Dude,
it's like he's just going to keep coming.
Yeah.
And so for that alone, I think he would win. Plus,
He's got the Rasputin energy.
Yeah.
You can drown and you can.
I wanted to give you another chance where I know, like I said, I know you've done. No, not like you take another.
That was Ben's really nice. That was a crap answer.
Yeah. No, I meant my other chance is I wanted to, in my pitch, it was because I know you did stunts for Brendan Fraser. I wanted you to go back and play George of the Jungle. And it's George of the Jungle versus Michael Myers. And then because you then get to do the Nick Cage Face Off or an adaptation thing where you're playing two dual roles.
Right.
Oh yeah, that would be cool.
Yeah.
I think Michael would still win.
Yeah.
I think George wouldn't know what was going on. That's okay.
That's fair. Well,
my buddy played him on the second.
Yeah, I know. I have the picture with Chris Sharman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Chris played him for the second one, which is great.
Yeah, I still have that movie on DVD, Chris Sharman's George of the Jungle 2. I've watched it within the past 3 years. I watched it in college for sure again. I really enjoy that movie. He's great. And he's a very nice guy.
Oh, he's wonderful.
Yeah. But the thing that I wanted to show you was, you talked about being the fact that your kids get the bragging rights. I always growing up got to, because, you're one of my dad's old buddies. I always got the bragging rights that we have this photo here that was hanging on in his office. So, it's still in my studio now. Nice. And it's always one of those things I get to say oh yeah, no, that's legit. I have photos, I have the photos from us when we were kids, when I was 4, and it's you and it's at your old place in, I won't say the name, but it's in your old place where you have the Michael Myers knife and mask hung up. And I have the photos with you somewhere. I don't know where they are now. I haven't seen them in years, but yeah. So it's always been that.
Yeah, because I have the photo with me and Jamie at the window, and above it I have the chair back.
Yeah.
So it says The Shape, and below it I have the knife.
Yeah.
Which is by the way, it's a 19-inch knife, chef knife.
19.
Yeah,
wow, that's crazy.
Definitely can't bring that on the plane.
No.
Holy crap. That's a knife.
Well,
that's a knife, yeah.
Chris, thank you so much for joining us. We are honored to have you to end this Halloween segment. And we just want to give a quick shout out. Unfortunately, with some of the events recently that happened this weekend, a young woman lost her life on set of the film Rust. And I just want to pronounce her name right while we're talking about it. But it was Helena Hutchins, I believe is how you pronounce it. Helena Hutchins. We just wanted to give a quick shout out because, we're a film podcast and tragedies like this. I know you're a stuntman, Chris, so you obviously empathize with stuff like this. We just wanted to give a quick shout out, and this episode's dedicated in her honor. Mm-hmm. And yeah.
Excellent.
Our hearts go out to
her and her family,
the crew, Alec Baldwin, even.
Everyone who is affected by this just unfortunate tragedy.
You guys. Big tragedy. It's really hard to hear those stories.
Yeah. Mm. So always just hard to hear it. But Chris, again, we just thank you so much for joining us.
Honor and a pleasure. Thank you for staying for so long. We're approaching an hour and a half with you. That's way longer than we bargained for, but you were a trooper and you gave us some really awesome insight into Michael Myers and just how that whole movie making process for H20 came to be. Yeah. It was awesome, man.
So we're honored to have you, man. If you have, I don't think you have anything to plug, but just go onto his IMDb page, check out all of Chris Durand's work, and there's so much cool stuff in there. And there is a lot of stuff you didn't even realize he was involved in.
This man's a heck of a stuntman.
Thank you, guys. I've got, if you look on Facebook, I guess probably down the road, I've got a couple books coming out too.
Okay, and we'll make sure to plug it once.
Totally different kinds of things.
Yeah.
I'll let you guys know when it's happening, but we're real close.
And we'll be glad to have you back on to promote those once you get closer.
Anytime, you guys, let me know.
Thanks, man. And with that, guys, that's Ben and Brand See a Movie. Thank you for joining us this week. And starting November, we have families and conflicts in honor of Thanksgiving. So we're doing movies that have families, and we have movies that we fight on. That's the whole theme of Thanksgiving. So thank you guys for joining us. I'm Ben.
I'm Bran.
And this is Chris. And thanks, guys. Take care and happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween, guys.